All right, last lesson was all about distance. This lesson is going to be all about midpoints. So let's talk about midpoints of a line segment. So a midpoint of a line segment is a point that divides the segment into two congruent segments. So what that tells me is that part equals part. So the midpoint makes it congruent, and because it's congruent, they are equal to each other. So if AB is congruent to BC, then AB equals BC. So when we're talking about midpoint, again, we're going to start on a line segment, and then we're going to do algebraically, and then finally we're going to do it on a graph. So, I forgot to put the midpoint formula in here. It's a pretty simple one. It works for both the graph and it works for the number line. x1 plus x2 divided by 2 is how we're going to find our midpoint. So again, the first one's going to be x1. The second one's going to be x2. So if I'm looking at my number line, x1 is A, -4. x2 is B, -2. Now, I'm not going to write that plus sign if my B is negative. I'm just going to use the sign I'm given, and we're going to put it over 2. So a -4 minus 2 is going to be -6 over 2. And so our final answer is going to be -3. Midpoint can be negative. That's a huge difference that we need to understand from distance. Midpoint oftentimes will be negative. Distance will never be negative. So our midpoint of AB is going to be -3. And if we look at our number line, it fits perfectly. So now I want you to try to do the midpoint of CB on your own and check it with the class completed notes. All right, so sometimes a problem is going to tell us that this point is a midpoint. But sometimes a problem is going to tell me that a line is a segment bisector. So a segment bisector, it can be a point, it can be a ray, it can be a line segment, or a plane that intersects the segment at its midpoint. So when we see that word bisector, bisector means cuts in half. So if it's a bisector, we know it's cut in half. We know we have a midpoint. So if we're looking at this example here, line L is my segment bisector, and it cuts AC in half, and B becomes our midpoint, or thing that is equal. So this would be part equals part. And then one last little note. You see these little marks right here on the line? Those little marks tell us that AB is congruent or the same as BC. So those are markings that you're going to see a lot in geometry, but just know that those mean congruent. So the problem tells me that Q is the midpoint. So anytime I see this word midpoint, I'm going to immediately put an equal sign above that point. Midpoint means they are equal. Midpoint means they are congruent. So now I have an equation that I can solve. 7x minus 16 equals 4x plus 2. So I'm going to subtract my 4x to the other side. Those 4's cancel. 3x minus 16 equals 2 plus 16 plus 16. 3x is going to equal 18. Divide by 3. And so x is going to equal 6. And my problem only wanted the value of x, so I can stop right there. Again, the problem tells me that h is the midpoint, so I'm automatically going to find h and put my equal sign. So now we've got our math problem. 8x plus 2 equals 9x minus 10. I'm going to subtract the 5. 2 equals 4x minus 10. I'm going to add 10 to the other side. Oh, that plus sign came out not a plus sign. So 2 plus 10 is 12 equals 4x. We divide by 4. Divide by 4. X equals 3. Now this problem wants me to find GH. So I need to put 3 back in. So 5 times 3 plus 2, 15, 16, 17 is going to be the distance of line segment GH. Oh, I forgot to erase this one. Give me a second, guys. All right, midpoint formula. Nope, that's not the button I want. I want that button right there. So midpoint formula is what we use to find the midpoint on a graph. And kind of like the formula we used earlier, one, if it's a midpoint on the graph, it has to be a point. So we need to use our parentheses and we need to have our comma. So our x coordinate we're going to find by x1 plus x2 over 2. Our y coordinate we're going to find by y1 plus y2 over 2. We will always write our answer in a simplified fraction. So again, our first point we have 0, 7. Our second point we have 4, 1. So x1, y1, x2, y2. So we've got x1, which is 0, plus x2, which is 4, over 2. Then we have our comma. Y1, which is 7, plus y2, which is 1, over 2. 0 plus 4 is 4. 7 plus 1 is 8. And then when we divide both by 2, we get 2, 4. So we can always check this if we're given a graph. I'm going to go to 2, 4. And if I draw my line, that point should be exactly on that line. If I can draw a straight line, it should be on that line. So I want you to try these two on your own, and I want you to check them with the completed notes.